Yat Eshe Daryn Yanishya. Hello, my name is Daryn. I'm coming at you live from Phoenix, Arizona. I am a sustainability and urban planning undergraduate at Arizona State University.
Hola, me llamo Ximena. Hello, my name is Ximena, and I'm coming to you live from Portland, Oregon. I am an environmental activist and the creator of Science Saves the World on YouTube. So, talk climate change to me.
So, did you know that climate change disproportionately affects low-income communities and communities of color?
EPA's National Center for Environmental Assessment released a study that states that people of color are more likely to live near polluters and breathe polluted air. They found these results at all national, state, and county levels.
And so the EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And according to them, that environmental just decisions will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to decision-making processes to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work, which they don't do majority of the time.
No, and that's what the problem is between like people wanting equality as opposed to equity, because equality is kind of technically what we have right now, which is that technically any person of any color can apply to any job, but that doesn't mean that the employer is going to be fair to them, despite the fact that we have laws in place and stuff, which is why we need equity rather than equality, because equity puts everyone at an even playing field rather than having people compete when there's already predetermined biases that are playing against them.
Exactly. And like one thing I think that the term equity, well, not the term, but like, what am I trying to say? So when we discuss equity, we think of just human lives. And I think that we need to kind of have a paradigm shift within that to where it'll start to incorporate non-human kin, which like we've talked about before, I'm super big on non-human kin. But because I think they're also included in environmental races. I guess it'd be environmental racism, even though they're technically not considered a human race, but I think they should be included in that because they're affected by environmental racist decisions as well. But that's a whole different conversation. And so I think before we get into everything, environmentalism, as we know today, it tends to focus on like the protection of like the natural environment and our non-human kin, which usually involves minimizing human presence, sustainable use of natural resources, and reduction of pollution, which is extremely important. But it tends to dismiss the equity among people and places as well as environmental protection, and equity, like you were just discussing. What am I trying to say? I literally just like lost my train of thought. Oh my God. So basically like environmentalism, it was born from the idea that we need to protect the environment, because of the way that early settler societies were treating the environment, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to like make it seem as simple as possible the way that I'm saying it, but I feel like I'm not explaining it as well. But I think everyone's going to get what I'm saying.
I
hope so.
Kind of like pretty much we started off by degrading the environment, and then we kind of displaced all of that pollution to affect the people that we like to push to the back, like, the minorities that we don't really put a lot of focus on, or we're starting to now, but like previously they didn't, like their rights were a lot lower or a lot less taken care of than those of traditional like European white families. And so even in places where they have like really bad animal agriculture farms, oh my gosh, this is one of the most disgusting things that I've ever heard. But apparently some farms in North Carolina, they have like these big ass tin sheds where they keep all of like the chickens and like pigs, like each of them have their own like shed gardens, I don't know what they're called, but they keep them all inside so they can't see the sun. And then they piss and shit on the floor.
Oh.
And they have like the specific like floors that allows all of that stuff to drain into a pool that's right next to that facility. And then those facilities fill up a couple times a day because there's so many animals in there. And then the way that they empty those is that they put them through the sprinklers.
Yeah.
Are typically down, or the people of color typically live downwind from those farms. And so all of that piss and shit is like in the air where all of these people are living and breathing, and it's causing a lot of like health problems. And of course, the reason that they keep doing it is because the people that live in these areas are from typically low income backgrounds. So they really don't have that much money to fight or like do anything on a legislative level. And so like they just pretty much have to deal with it. And they're doing this on purpose because they know that they can't fight back.
Yeah, no, I've heard exactly. I heard about that too. And like, I know they also have some pools. So when the pools sit there, I guess the drainage, I guess you could say, from those sheds, it seeps into the ground. So it pollutes the ground as well. So the area around those farms, even if they wanted to grow food there, it would be contaminated because of those things. So that right there is a form of environmental racism as well, because of the fact that, like, you know, people of color tend to live around those communities and they can't even be self-sufficient, even if they're already self-sufficient, but self-sufficient in regards to like growing their own food. Like they couldn't even do that because of those type of things, you know?
Yeah, like I think I watched a documentary where like it was a family that was growing their own crops, and they were told by authorities that they were not allowed to eat any of the crops or any of the food that grew on their property because it was so contaminated. And it's just like insane because these people have the right to like at least feel safe in their own homes, and they're being polluted literally because they're downwind from animal agriculture farms. And so that's another reason that we don't like animal agriculture here.
I know we really don't. I hate how controversial this is too, but like they're one of the leading causes of climate change. But when people hear you talk about that, they think you're attacking them eating meat, and then they try to come after you. And like whenever I talk to you about it, I'm just like, I'm literally not trying to come after you. I'm literally just saying that this is a problem, and here are the facts. You can decide on whatever you want based on that, but I'm not trying to make you do anything. But even when you tell people that, sometimes they're not even going to listen to you, you know?
I always do that preface because I'm at the point where I'm not trying to influence anybody's point of view. I'm simply telling you mine, and you can do it with that information what you will, but whatever you say is definitely not going to change my opinion. And if I do at least influence you enough to look up more information, that's awesome. But I'm not like pushing anybody towards a lifestyle because that's your life. I don't buy your food and I don't have your stomach. So none of my business as far as that goes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that people like, I guess when people hear environmental racism, they don't really know how that ties in with climate change. I mean, with climate change, because it's like you hear environmental racism and the term itself is very self-explanatory, but like you also have to break it down into what exactly it is. But you would, when you hear environmental racism, unless you know about it like me and you're not gonna understand how the two are exclusively, like mutually exclusive. You know what I mean? So I think the way to explain this to people would be that, you know, climate change tends to be framed as like just a scientific problem, which I mean, for the most part it is, like we both know. But the problem that is climate change is it's a system made up of systems. So there's like subsystems within this major system that work together to fuel the climate crisis. So it's like similar to the engine of a car. So the engine of a car, like, it obviously powers a vehicle, but when there's like a problem that is wrong with a certain part of the engine, that's a certain small system within the system. I don't even know about cars, but I just remember in one of my classes, they were explaining it that way. And I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. So I hope that like I was able to use that same explanation to help other people understand it. Yeah, exactly. But when what happens is when you look at climate change as just one big problem, that's a mindset that is referred to as like the top-down view of a problem. So you just see like you see the bigger picture, which is good, but then you don't really understand what exactly is going on within it. And so the general public is only informed by the bigger picture, so they don't understand the small things that are causing the problem.
Yeah, especially because a lot of the coverage is, again, coming from like white people, who typically are from more privileged backgrounds. And so they completely glide over facts that they don't understand because they've never been a person of color. And like, no matter how much I can try to explain it to somebody, you don't know what it feels like unless you are a person of color. Because I had a coworker literally, when I was explaining to him how sad I was about diversity, literally straight up telling me, I wish everybody would just be able to get along with everybody. Like, I'm white and I wouldn't mind being around Asian people. And that comment is so problematic because you don't understand what it's like from the point of view of somebody who has brown skin. Because like, yeah, I really do wish that everybody could get along just like you do, but that's not the reality for people who come from like lower income backgrounds, from backgrounds of color, with our culture being drowned out by everything else that's happening. And so it's honestly like, it's very hard to try to get somebody who doesn't even understand that basic, like just the fact of racism to even understand environmental racism, because like we mentioned, primarily communities of color are being affected by air pollution more than white people. And so they automatically are on a different demographic and experiencing different things than we are because of the locations where we live.
Exactly. And that goes back to like colonization of the Americas, because like when they came, they strategically planned out communities to where they were placing people of color in certain areas that were affected by those issues and placing white people in areas that were not, because they always had they perceived themselves as superior to everybody else, which isn't the case. But that is the unfortunate reasoning behind the unfortunate reasoning behind the birth of environmental racism, and there's a few principles of environmental justice, which is it's a segment of environmental racism, but that I felt like I wanted to touch on. One of them is that public policy should be based on mutual respect and justice for all people, which, as you've seen, that isn't the case in a lot of public policies that have come into play within the past couple of years. It also mandates the right to ethical, balanced, and responsible uses of land and renewable resources in the interests of a sustainable planet for humans and non-humans, which what Ximena what we were just talking about with the farms in North Carolina. Like that right there is you're not giving the right to responsible uses of land in the interest of a sustainable planet for humans and non-humans, because of the fact that that land is getting polluted because of the farming. Mm-hmm. And then this other principle, which I think is really important, because that's going to kind of bring us into the our guest speaker, who's going to talk about an issue right now, is that environmental justice considers governmental acts of environmental injustice a violation of international law. Which I know our current administration doesn't like to discuss international law in regards to the United Nations, even though that's all I'm going to say about him, because, yeah.
There's not that many positive things that we go down that road from.
It really isn't. But so we do have a special guest on our show today, which I'm really excited, and I know Ximena's just as excited.
Yes.
And so they're actually going to bring light to an environmental racism issue that's controversial in the media, but it's a perfect example of what environmental racism is and what an environmentally unjust abuse of governmental power is. So this particular issue is violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations Conventions on Genocide, which, if you don't know what those two things are, I would suggest looking them up. It would take a really, really long time for me to explain those to you, which I would gladly do, but I don't think you want to sit here and listen to this podcast for probably like 2 hours, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah. We could save that to be its own episode.
Yeah, we could literally have an entire episode dedicated to just that. But we know that you all are going to really enjoy our guest speaker because we are very, very excited to have them on here. So, yeah.
So today we're going to be discussing environmental racism and the impacts it's going to have on the southern states of the U.S.
And we're actually going to be talking with a really, really good friend of mine, Hon'mana Seukteoma. She's a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and she's also a documentarian.
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to be here with all of you. And thank you to Daryn and Ximena for having me on the show today. I am a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation, so I'm currently residing in Tucson, Arizona, and I am working on a short documentary about O'odham opposition to the border wall, just because a lot of outside media, international and national media, doesn't really ever dig deeper into why O'odham oppose the border wall. Usually you find a lot of them trying to get their point across, get their story, get it turned into their editors. It's never very in-depth or handled with care. So that's what I've been choosing to work on for the past over a year now.
That's amazing. And I've seen some of your work and the things that we've discussed, obviously, outside of the podcast and in person and everything. And you're actually really inspiring to me.
Thank you. I also have ran my own YouTube channel for the past 5 years now. So that's definitely been a very big push for me to do, to step into documentary work.
What made you decide to start your channel?
My channel started back in 2014 when I was at college. I'm a first-generation college student, and it was very hard for me to navigate the system. That's very bureaucratic and not made or set up for people of color to survive and succeed. So I was feeling very homesick, even though I was just an hour away from home. But just being in a new environment without my own people around me really made me miss home. So a way I was able to push myself to connect with my people again was online through YouTube. And that had been something I wanted to do for the past 5 years before that, all throughout high school. So I finally got the push and I did it. And I've been on the platform helping to cultivate a Native YouTube community, because what my biggest passion what I've discovered it to be, has been accurate representation of natives in the media. So accurate Native representation. And so I realized that we can't, wait on Hollywood or mainstream media to accurately portray who we are, what we do, and what we want. And we have to start doing it ourselves. And one of the most cheapest, efficient, most accessible ways that people can do that is online and through social media. So YouTube was a platform that I went to. And, back then in 2015, 2014, when I was barely getting on the platform, I knew all of Native YouTube. We could count each other on our hands. And now I can find a new Native YouTuber every day of every week, which is exciting. That means it's growing. That means it's working. That means people are realizing how important this is to represent ourselves.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And I definitely agree with you that we can't wait for the mainstream media in Hollywood to bring about the accurate representation for us, because they're never, as sad as it sounds, they're never going to do it. And so we have to do it ourselves,
It's true.
So before we get into the topic, I think it's really really important that we kind of establish the groundwork for where we're going to be heading, because like environmental justice is a big issue, but it's also very different when it affects Indigenous people because of the fact that the political circumstances that were put in, they I guess they differ drastically from other ethnic minorities because of the fact that our connections predate settler state that is currently known as the U.S. So a lot of the connections to like our territories and our cultures and our homelands and everything have been here for time immemorial, which is very different than those who are not, I guess, what am I trying to say? Whose ancestors are not from this continent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like even when I was doing my research on environmental racism, the main two groups that they usually highlight are Blacks and Hispanics, which I'm Hispanic. I'm Hispanic, and like it's just crazy because you guys, you're such a small portion of it, but you guys are more impacted by things because you guys try to stick to your territory and the government is constantly trying to take it away from you and trying to repossess it and use it as something else. And it's just not really talked about. Like I couldn't find much on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. It all just kind of has to do with settler colonialism. Environmental justice is a really big form of settler colonialism because it's linked with like the larger issue of Indigenous erasure, which is kind of built built into the very foundation of this country, you know.
And it kind of forces you guys to like even more be a voice for your people because, like she said, nobody else is like the mainstream media isn't going to pick up and tell you your guys' story, or even if they do tell it, they're not going to tell it accurately. So it has to come straight from you guys for it to be as accurate as possible.
Exactly. Which I think ties into, which I guess the topic that we're going to bring up today is, it's very good that we have Hon'mana here, whose traditional territory lies on the border because it's affecting all border states, but this is affecting her nation in a very particular way compared to non-native communities on the border. And so Hon'mana, I would just like for you to just kind of explain like what exactly is going on within the region, and how it's like affecting your nation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to kind of backtrack because this has been happening ever since the Gadsden Purchase, which I believe was in the 1800s. And this was the purchase that made Arizona a part of the United States. So it cut our nation in half because our ancestral homelands, the Tohono O'odham ancestral homelands, range all over southern Arizona into Mexico and to the Gulf of Mexico. So what the Gadsden Purchase did was cut our ancestral homelands in half, and then, of course, with the reservation system being established, that made us bound to this small parcel of land compared to our original homelands. And so modern day Tucson, Arizona is a part of those homelands. Lands in Sonora, Mexico are part of those homelands. And right now on our reservation, we have tribal members living there. We have tribal members living all over the world, but we also have tribal members in traditional villages right across the border. So for me, my grandpa was actually from Guadalajara, Mexico. And we would always go and cross the border and visit every summer and just be there with family. My favorite part was, of course, going to Rocky Point because we got to go to the beach and it was just a wonderful time. But ever since 9/11, there have been increased militarization tactics and actions that have taken place on our reservation. So, with 9/11, of course, increased security. You can ask someone who's maybe a couple decades older than me, I'm 24 now, what it was like when you didn't have to go through TSA, when you went onto a flight at the airport. they remember people's families were able to walk them to the gate to get on their plane. Well, for us on the reservation, we could just freely leave our res, go to Tucson to buy groceries, go to Casa Grande to buy groceries. But now in present day, you have to go through a checkpoint every time you leave the reservation. So any exit or entrance, you have to go through, speed bumps, the speed trackers. If it's nighttime, there's lights that are on, and there's always like infrared gadgets that watch every car that crosses through to make sure they can see the body heat in the car, and then you pull up to the checkpoint, and there's a Border Patrol agent stationed there, and they ask you if you are a U.S. citizen, and if everyone else in the car is as well. And a lot of people who tend to go through these checkpoints are tribal members. So I grew up at a time where I lived on and off the reservation a lot when I was growing up. So I'd never really took note of how foreign the concept is and how bizarre it is that you have to go through a militarized checkpoint where dogs are sniffing your car and there's armed agents around and cameras watching you, so much surveillance, and you have to be asked if you are a citizen of this country. Well, this is our land and you're on it. So why should I have to prove my citizenship to you? You're not from here. You're not O'odham. You're not native. You're from some other place, somewhere else, and you're here interrogating me just so I can leave and go to the store and buy groceries for my family. Like that, those are the things that kind of became normalized when I was growing up. So now as an adult, I didn't realize this wasn't okay until older people in my life started talking about how this never was the norm. And now we have children growing up today who don't know any different, who don't know that this isn't what it's supposed to be like, who don't know what it's like to just leave your res because you want to and come home and not feel like you're being watched or you're being followed or you're going to be harassed. And that's just like the bare minimum interaction that a non-O'odham can have on our reservation, because a lot of people get to freely pass through because there's a lot of racial profiling that happens whenever you have an interaction with the Border Patrol agent. So when you ask about what's going on the Tohono O'odham Nation in regards to the border wall, one of our fears is increased militarization. So I described to you just a simple interaction that can take place daily, weekly, monthly for a lot of different tribal members. And you already have people who have more violent stories than that. I have a more violent story. A lot of people in my family do. So everyone has a story, whether it happened to you or a family member or a friend or someone in your life, everyone has a story about violent encounters with Border Patrol. So when you talk about building this border wall, you talk about non-O'odham construction workers coming into our homelands, into our reservations, our villages, our districts, our communities. You also talk about more Border Patrol agents and more federal agencies coming to quote unquote patrol these borders because, in the sake of national security, which when you think about it, there's no true reason why a physical border wall should be built, because there are always going to be other ways that people innovate to get what they want across the border. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's just a small glimpse that I was able to share with you about what's happening in just on the reservation itself. That doesn't include current border wall construction actually happening on O'odham homelands to the west of our reservation.
Have there been any people that you know of that have been detained by Border Patrol, like unjustly through these checkpoints or anything?
Oh yeah, you get a lot of agents who just, feel like they have power because they do, because they have a badge, because they have that agency to hide behind, and because they're not from here. So there's no accountability. And a lot of people, like I said, have stories. And so one of the more violent stories actually happens, tends to be detainment. I have family members who were detained unjustly. I have family members who were detained because they were doing illegal activity. But even then, they were mistreated. So there's just very little regard. I have a story from a very close family member of mine who I recently got permission to film them and this interaction that I heard about when I was a kid. A family member had told me that they had been arrested by the Border Patrol and they were going to go to prison. But luckily they were able to beat the case and they didn't have to. So as I was starting to think about this short documentary I want to work on about O'odham opposition to the border wall, one of those is trying to figure out how to portray, this border violence, this increased militarization and the negative effects it will have on O'odham here, how to portray that. And one of the most powerful stories I could think of was this story about my close family member. So, after all this time, I'm like 20, I turned 24 this year. And I finally asked them, is this true? So they sat me down and told me all the ins and outs of it. Basically, they were getting harassed by these Border Patrol agents, and they had violently brutalized them. So my close family member said that they were in fear of losing their lives, so they fought back. And because of that, they were charged with 2 accounts of federal assault on federal agents. So what that meant was that they were supposed to go to federal prison and become a felon just for defending themselves when no one else was around. The only thing that saved them was the recording that the Border Patrol agent's car was taking, and the case did get thrown out. But this close family member does a lot of very important community-based work. And they work with so many different ages in the community. So if they would have been charged for those 2 accounts of assault on federal agents, they would still be in prison right now. They would never be able to do the important work that they do that's very positive for our community. Their whole lives would be completely changed, for less positive, outcomes. And so that's just one example that, I finally got permission to be able to sit down and talk to and interview and record, and hopefully the end product will be in my film, whatever you want to call it. That's just one example. And there's so many. There's more that are more violent. There's more that have more higher stakes. There's more that are more frequent and less violent, There's just a very large spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That's definitely a lot. I was getting emotional just hearing that, because when I hear the way people get treated in those type of situations, it makes me very angry. Especially when it's other Native people, because I don't want to say anything else because I'm going to just get really emotional. I feel like I want to cry right now, but I'm going to not cry because I don't want to do that. But yeah, I think like there's a lot of majority of people in our country right now, they don't really understand how it's affecting Native people, and especially just the southern border in general. Um, and like what I think one of the big things that I noticed when I was kind of reading up on the topic before we started talking about this was one of the I guess one of the ways like the wall is gonna impact the like the natural environment, which it already did before. Was during like the Bush administration. There was like the fencing that was through the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. I think it was in 2008 when there was flooding and like debris got stuck on the fence. So there was like a pool of 7 or 8 feet of water there. If I'm not too sure of the specifics of it, but I did read up on that. And obviously with climate change, the storms are going to get worse and the flooding's going to get even worse. And with that border wall, especially with, I guess, how big it's supposed to be, it's just going to be very, very, very detrimental to the people who live along the border, as well as like all the different, all like the biodiversity within Southern Arizona, you know? And,
and it's true because it's already happening. I mean, one of the big things that people talk about is this like washes that run across the border. Those flow freely. Like water does what it wants when it comes down to it. It's going to always do what it wants. And so even then, you know, with the Bush administration, you know, 9/11 happened and this big hysteria over national security took place. Physical border barriers were established across the border. And one of the things was these washes. Like you can try to put these, you know, vehicle barriers, and they're those things that look like jacks, you know, that you play with. You play jacks. Yeah. They look like that, but they're like huge and very heavy. And so those are the vehicle barriers. And I believe that they tried to put some along the wash, one of these big, very large washes here on the border, on the reservation, and like it didn't work. Like they would get washed away, or you know, there was no point to it. And so the other thing that is very directly related to O'odham homelands and, you know, our history, there is this small spring out in Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. And it's a traditional O'odham spring that has been there for a long time. And that is I just call it O'odham homelands, but there's four, I would say, well, 3 different variations of O'odham. So we're on O'odham, which just means desert, a desert people. Tohono meaning desert, O'odham meaning people. So there's another part of us who are Yachid O'odham, and Yachid meaning sand and O'odham meaning people. So Yachid O'odham, you know, they were in that territory for a long time, and they credit, you know, some of their survival to that historical O'odham spring there called Ito Paquito. And so I actually got to visit there in August because there was a lot of talk about border wall construction starting the week after we were visiting. And one of the things that people were afraid of was that the spring would be used to mix, you know, the cement and all the materials that are needed for border wall construction. So it didn't start the week after, but being there in that place it was very beautiful. You're in the middle of the desert, and it's so dry. There's no, you know, running washes unless the monsoons come. There's no lakes. There's nothing. It's just all dry. And so you go to the spring, it's beautiful, and there's endangered species there already, and some of which only survive there. They're nowhere else in the entire world. So there's this, I believe it's a mud frog who lives there, and that's the only place it exists. There's also another type of fish that lives there. And So you're talking about killing off these already endangered species just to build a border wall that won't actually combat any smuggling, any drug running, any whatever people complain about the border for.
Yeah.
Because I don't really care. I don't. It's there's I don't care in the sense that this border wall is not going to do anything to combat it, really.
It's been proven even.
Exactly. So you have that spring that's being, it's just not even like 100 feet from the border. So I'm pretty sure that they're going to end up using that water and dry the spring. You also have the construction people taking about, I think it was like something like 20 or 30,000 gallons of water a day from our aquifers. So our underground aquifers. And, you know, this is to help sustain all the people who live there on the reservation. And I don't know how long it's going to take to replenish those aquifers, but that's how much water is being taken from us like every day just to mix concrete and build that border wall.
See, and like that right there is a form of environmental injustice because of the fact that like they're taking water sources from you all, and it's literally just for the construction of a stupid border wall. It makes no sense. And I think one of the bigger, like, to build off of that, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that the construction that's going on, they're not required to meet. I think that there's like 20 or 30 plus federal environmental laws that include the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Water Act, to name a few. They can just kind of like ignore all of those just to build this wall, you know? Mm-hmm. And which kind of goes back to what you were saying, how there's a lot of endangered species there that are just going to be completely disregarded. And there was something that you said that really stuck out to me that I want to kind of talk about a little bit more, is how you were saying that is O'odham homelands and how that helps sustain your people and everything. And I think one of the big things that most settler societies don't understand is that the thing that distinguishes us from them, and I don't, not as like a divisive, like, oh, it's us against them type thing, but just in general, is that, and I use us lightly because I don't know what it's like to grow up on the reservation. I didn't grow up traditionally. I'm still reconnecting. So I don't like to take up space when I'm not in a place to do so. You know what I mean? But is the fact that Indigenous people, they, like, we have unbroken connections to the lands that our people are from. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. We've been here since time immemorial, and I know that might be like a really hard concept for non-natives to understand, and just to be very blunt, like, you never will. It's taught to us through our traditions, our stories, our songs, our creation stories. So from the time that we were younger, if we had, you know, the privilege of having elders or parents or adults or even, you know, siblings in our lives who could share our cultural heritage with us, you know, those are the main things that tell us who we are. And a lot of it has to do with the connection to the land. So I actually went out to the first protest here held on O'odham lands against the border wall. And that was this like a weekend ago. And there were these signs that they had on, well, people had printed them and they were holding them out. And there are 41 laws waived to have the border wall built. So another one of those is the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, American Indian Religious Freedom Act, the Wilderness Act, and so many more. But I know I heard 36 or something at another time. And so I think as time goes on, the law waivers are just increasing. And, those are set in place to protect ourselves from ourselves. And here we are, waiving all of them to have this built.
It's just a vanity project. Like, it literally means nothing. It's just for his base so that they can shut up about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at least he's in his impeachment hearings right now, and he literally committed another impeachment offense during his impeachment hearings. So if Republicans can grow some balls, maybe something will happen.
Thank you. I hope so.
Hopefully, it's all on the Senate, because I genuinely believe that he will get impeached by the House. It's just all about if the Senate wants to grow some balls and actually talk back about it, because he's broken so many laws just building this construction project and throughout his presidency. Like, when he was elected, there was 2 weeks of straight protests. Mm-hmm. Like, on his 100th day in office, there was a whole bunch of protests, and I don't know how it took this long to find an actual impeachable offense.
I actually went to one of the protests after he took office in Austin, and that was probably the largest protest I've ever been to. It was very, very overwhelming. I lost majority of the friends that I was with. I lost them because there was thousands upon thousands of people, and it was really nice to be around people who also are against those type of people, like Trump. But it was also overwhelming, because of the fact that they're overwhelming as far as emotions go, because there's so many people who are against what's going on and against degradation of the environment and against indigenous erasure and all these different things. But yet these things continue to happen when there's so many of us who are against it.
It's because so many people are complicit. Like what we're doing right now, you have your YouTube channel where you're bringing up Native issues. We're talking about other environmental issues, and we're taking action in a way. There's a lot of people that can just retweet and sit back and just be complicit and just be upset that this stuff is happening, but do absolutely nothing. And so I think that's kind of why it's taken so long, because there's so much inaction. We just want to what is the word? Accept. We just want to accept that this is happening, when honestly, it shouldn't be happening. We should be doing exactly this, speaking out, talking about it, showing up, representing what we want to happen.
Mm-hmm. And holding our representatives accountable. That's something that I definitely was able to learn more about, becoming more civically engaged because of, all of these things that are happening that this administration is putting forth into our society. But I was actually able to spend time in Texas this last, I want to say in the summertime, to stand in solidarity with the Carrizo Comicrudo tribe of Texas. And they are another border tribe, actually, who has actually physically occupied this traditional part of their homelands that the border wall is going to be. It was proposed to be built through there, and it was their cemetery. So they stood up and decided to occupy that space. I want to say I heard about this for the first time last year. And so they were having a protest to stand against ICE and ripping families apart in the detention centers. And so they were able to organize a protest right outside of a detention center, a couple blocks away. So it was really nice, but just being there and hearing from those tribal members and leaders, they were telling us, because they work closely with the Butterfly Center, which is also another place that is being heavily surveillanced because of their opposition to the border wall construction as well. So they kind of work together. And one thing that one of the directors at the National Butterfly Center was telling us was that It's a very hard thing to follow, but it all makes sense, and I still need to get more information about it. But basically, Trump, he owes all this money to people in Russia, and one of the best ways he has been able to put together in his tiny little brain is to get this border wall built and use, these companies from Russia to help build it. So all this steel and all of these panels that are coming into the country, when I went to the border this last weekend, there are these like 30-foot steel like panels that they are basically going to put up like next to each other. And all of those are coming from that company. And that's how he's using government money and tax dollars to pay for his debts to those people. So it's infuriating all around.
No, it is.
Yeah, no, it really, really is. And the tribe, I can't remember the name you were talking about in Texas. There's a gentleman, I can't remember his name, because I had a no DAPL protest in San Antonio when I lived there, and there was a couple people from that tribe who came out, and they were super, super sweet. And I remember them talking about that issue with me as well. I wish I could remember his name. I'll have to look up. I have him on Facebook. I'll look him up, and then I'll see if maybe you met him. But something that so I've been reading this book called As Long as Grass Grows, which I'm sure everybody knows, so I've been talking about it on Twitter forever. But there's something that a quote that I want to read in here from Dr. Julia Whitaker. She put that in indigenous worldviews, there's no separation between people and land, between people and other life forms, or between people and their ancient ancestors whose bones are infused in the land they inhabit and whose spirits permeate place. Which I think that in itself, if you think about what that means for us and what they're doing to the land, they're not only affecting our non-human kin that are there, they're not only affecting our people, but they're affecting our ancestors and our future kin, which includes human and non-human life forms. And I think that's a really big thing that is kind of disregarded in regards to this environmental injustice issue, and something that I wish more non-Native people and more people who are focusing on this issue would kind of take into account,
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I was able to look up that company, and it's Evraz Still. So that was the company that those people were talking to us about from the National Butterfly Center. So it's definitely something I've been wanting to look into. But yes, back to your quote. It was really good.
No, but I agree. I want to actually look at that company now.
Because it feels very conspiracy theorist, but also what's a conspiracy theory at this point? True. When all of it is basically came out to be true.
Yeah. This is true. This is very true.
At least one lighthearted-ish story that I've heard about the construction of the border wall, I think I heard it on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, is that there was actually people on the other side of the border that were stealing supplies.
I love
it. They were fencing their own houses and stuff with the supplies from the border and stealing different tools. So at least they're getting something.
I love it.
Who are they? Because I want to make them some earrings. Oh no. I love them already. I don't even know who they are.
Everyone start stealing these supplies, please. Right?
Yeah, go build a house with them.
Well, I mean, we probably should do that since, we have a lack of affordable housing in the US. So we could use that.
Just go down to the border and steal what you need to build your house.
Exactly.
Literally. And I was hearing stories too that people were there was what was it? He was trying to build it with steel, wood, and some other material. And he was saying oh, it's indestructible. And then somebody was commenting that no, they literally just broke a hole in the wall the other day, with some power tool that they bought at the store. And Trump's over here oh, but it's indestructible. It just proves how dumb, the concept is.
No, one funny thing I did hear at the protest this weekend, I was like, very emotionally distraught because it was a very, very heavy and deep moment for me to witness that. And I was kind of like, I heard it at the back of like in my head. Well, not in my head, but like just like very faint. And someone had said metal gloves and metal shoes. And then I kind of like snapped out of it. And I was like, wait, what are you guys talking about? And my roommates, we were all going back here to Tucson together, and they were laughing like, oh no, someone had made the comment, all you have to do to get over the border wall now is have metal gloves and metal shoes. So like climb it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like just the concept. It was very funny. I'm like, thank you for saying that. I needed to hear that.
No, he was like legit like floating around the idea of putting like alligators and crocodiles.
Oh God,
like,
I remember.
That is so dumb. Like, one, how are they going to survive in a desert? And two, like, where are you gonna get this water from? Like, we're in a desert.
And all these crocodiles.
I know, like, well, I guess the snowbirds in Florida would be happy that their little dogs wouldn't be endangered, since
that's
probably
little
dogs.
Oh my goodness.
Because logic doesn't exist.
I know.
Not in this presidency.
Right? And haven't you heard? Neither does climate change.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. It's just a Chinese hoax, right?
Native American Heritage Month doesn't even exist anymore.
Who is she? I don't know her.
No, we don't remember.
You know Christopher Columbus.
Ew.
No.
Oh.
That is the person that shall not be named
on this podcast.
Never. As a matter of fact, he's banished.
The C word.
The C word.
Yes.
That's my new C word.
If I hear you say a C word, I'm slapping you. That's it.
No, I'm just going to say literally the phrase, the C word. That's it.
Did you say the C word? And then before you can respond, slap to the face.
Or we could also say the C word to not get confused with the C word itself.
No, that way that's...
Oh, yes.
That way you do confuse it because they're the same thing.
That's true. That's true.
Very valid.
It's been so fun talking with both of you. I'm really excited to hear about your podcast and all the work that you're doing. And very happy that you were able to have me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was I was very excited when we were having that picnic in Tucson, and I just was like, oh, this would be a good idea. Like, I'm really happy this worked out because I liked hearing what you had to say, and bringing up this topic and how this really does tie in with climate change and everything.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to hear or to watch your film whenever it comes out.
Thank you.
Really want to watch it.
Yes.
It was supposed to be done by the end of this year because I'm with the fellowship right now working on it. But really, I don't think it was meant to be finished by the end of the year, with everything that's happening now, with the first, physical border wall protest happening on O'odham homelands. I am very fearful that things will get more violent and just a lot more brutalization happening to O'odham tribal members. So that's something that I always keep in mind as a lot of allies, want to step forward and support us and occupy these spaces in order to stop border wall construction if it comes to the point where you have to physically occupy that space. I just think about the people, my people, and what's going to happen to us, because at the end of the day, everyone else can go home, wherever they're from, but we always have to be here because this is our home. So that's something that I shared recently on a post that I had shared online. And I always think about this time about 2 years ago when the president came in. I don't like to say his name, but he came into office, and the January right after that, he signed the executive order to have the border wall built. And so there was this hysteria happening out home on the res and O'odham communities and families and villages. And just wondering what that means. Like, oh, is construction starting tomorrow? Like, what are we going to do? And Standing Rock had just been, basically evicted. There were a lot of arrests made and a lot of brutalization and, of course, militarization in that space. And so a lot of people are afraid, like, do we have to stand up? And what is that going to look like for us? So I remember there was this panel discussion with tribal leaders, and our chairperson had just came back from Standing Rock because our nation sent a caravan up there of like a lot of people and supplies and everything. And so he said he was talking to their chairman, and their chairman told ours, Trump's coming into office and border wall construction will start. So if you ever need us, just make the call and we'll all be there to help you and we'll stand with you. And when he said that, like the whole room fell silent. And this was standing room only in our legislative council chambers. And we just all like collectively thought about that reality. And so finally the chairman was like, but that can't happen here. We can't have Standing Rock happen here. And it was kind of like a sigh of relief for everyone because we were all thinking the same thing, like, no, that can't happen here. And so logistically, if he was talking about if that happens, it's more like you have a bunch of non-O'odham coming into this space and into the middle of the desert. It gets like an upwards of 120 degrees in the summertime, and that's not an exaggeration. You have people exposed to the elements, meaning rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, animals, the biodiversity that's just existed there because we let it. And you have all these people coming in to stand in solidarity with us. But you also have one hospital that serves all the members. So it's, not a huge hospital you would find in the city. Within like an hour or two from the desert itself. So there's no infrastructure to support a mass of people like that. And there will have to be a mass of people that are needed to stop border wall construction if it ever comes to the Tohono O'odham Nation. And so being at the protest this weekend, it was a good feeling to hear allies there and see them and physically be in that space with them. But it was just also like, wow, we did everything for this past 2 years to make sure this didn't happen, and here we are. And so it's kind of, for me, it's a little scary because it feels like the calm before the storm, because I don't know what's going to happen. But I guess in a way that's back to my original point. That's why my short film was probably not supposed to be finished by this point. Mm-hmm. And I still have a lot more work to do, which, I'm happy to, because I want us to be able to tell our own stories, because that's what we deserve and we should be doing. But I'm excited for you to see it whenever it comes out.
I'm excited to watch. I'm going to be your number one fan.
Okay.
I mean, I already am, but.
Okay.
I sleep all day 'cause I'm up all night, wondering why my eyes are never wide when I drive.
So, I mean, as you all heard from Hon'mana, it's very apparent that the border wall is going to adversely affect the Tohono O'odham Nation, on the Tohono O'odham people in general, because, as Hon'mana mentioned, that they are on both sides of the border. And it's also going to adversely affect the biodiversity in southern Arizona and northern Mexico. And I think it's really important that we talk about this because by engaging in these conversations, we're able to acknowledge that environmental justice and injustices are not only involving humans, but also our non-human kin, which, for those of you who don't really understand what non-human kin is, It includes soils, plants, waters, waterways, animals of all kinds, including insects, those different types of things. And I think we really do need to challenge this notion that environmental justice and injustice only affects humans, because non-humans are disproportionately affected. And this isn't to say that humans come second. It's just simply placing non-human kin as equal, and that they're requiring the same protections as us, And I mean, thus far, if you've been following our podcast, I'm sure you can tell that our conversations are very much biocentric, and biocentric ethic-based conversations call for a reevaluation of the relationships between human and non-human kin. So when we relate climate change to environmental and social justice, we're able to better examine issues relating to biocentric equality, human rights, animal rights, indigenous rights, and our responsibilities as caretakers of this planet. And so I want to give a special thanks to Hon'mana for joining us tonight, and revealing her story and everything that not only she is dealing with, but her people and those in her community, because I know that that is not something that's easy to talk about. Which, I mean, you all heard me in the podcast. I actually kind of got emotional just listening to it. And so I really wanted to say thank you to her for that.
Yeah, and thank you so much to her. This is the first time that I met her, and she was great, and I'm glad that she was able to share all of that stuff with us. If you want to follow her on Instagram or Twitter, I will leave I will leave her usernames in the comments down below on the YouTube and the Spotify channel, and I will link her YouTube channel in the YouTube description of this podcast.
So thank you so much for listening. We hope that you were able to learn something from us. And please be sure to subscribe to Science Saves the World on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, iTunes, and please, please, please don't forget to share this on all your social media platforms. We will catch you later.
Bye. Go hug some trees.